an essay by Charles Baudelaire Ashanin entitled How a French Priest Perceived Our Universe, published in the Columbia Record, Columbia, South Carolina, on Saturday, May 20th, 1967. April 10th, 1955 was Easter Sunday. This date will be remembered for a long time, for it brought to an end in New York City the life of one of the most magnificent personalities of our time. This was the French Jesuit priest Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the great scientist whose researches in the field of paleontology rank him among the great men of science. But it is not as a scientist in the technical sense of the word that his name is creating one of the greatest intellectual revolutions of our time in science, philosophy, and religion. It is safe to say that for the next 100 years it will not be possible to discuss issues in any of these fields without coming to terms with the thought of Teilhard de Chardin. This being the case, it is necessary that the ordinary man, who is neither a professional scientist, philosopher, or theologian, knows something of this extraordinary human being who has left us a great legacy both in the history of his own life, which is now being written down, and in his numerous writings, which have now become the property of mankind as its valuable treasure. The latter is the more remarkable, for during his lifetime, this great mind was forbidden by the Holy Office of the Roman Catholic Church to publish his philosophical and religious writings. Perhaps the world would never have come to have them but for the fact that Teilhard de Chardin was persuaded by a fellow Jesuit to make a will and appoint an executor to publish his works posthumously, as this would not be contrary to his vows as a Jesuit. This was providential, for Teilhard de Chardin was very anxious to maintain his membership in the Society of Jesus and the Catholic Church, even though he was exiled from Europe to all intents and purposes by his superiors on account of his views. He had to spend a great deal of his life in China, where he did great work in paleontology and geology with a team of international scientists with whom he collaborated. One of the results of this work was the discovery of the fossils of Sinanthropus, or Peking man, who, by the way, was really a woman nicknamed Nellie by de Chardin. The last years of de Chardin's life were spent in New York at the Winter Grin Foundation, which subsidized paleontological research, on which he was working when death came to him just before his 74th birthday. Now that the life and work of this genius is becoming public knowledge through the publication of his work and numerous writings about him, we are allowed to look behind the curtain and decipher the great puzzle of why the world had to wait for his death in order to benefit from the light of his mind and spirit, when some of his writings were written long before his death. To put it briefly, the reasons are as follows. The Roman Catholic Church had become committed to an Aristotelian view of the universe. We may call it static. Moreover, the world was one reality which the scientists investigated, while religion was another reality called supernatural and artificially superimposed upon the natural world. Between these two, there has existed a kind of uneasy truce which, with each sovereign in its own field and often disdainful of the other. Thus, man's world was divided into hostile camps of people who held either scientific or religious views. Being both a scientist and a deeply religious person, Teilhard discovered first that the universe is not static, but in the process of what he called cosmogenesis, development or evolution, and that this process is not a movement of blind force, as the materialistic view maintains, but a divinely ordained and divinely guided process moving through the hylosphere, or various stages of development, toward the biosphere, which is the stages of life, toward the noosphere, that of thought and man, toward what he calls the Omega point, or ultra-humanization, in which creation, led forward by divine energy, reaches its fulfillment in the God of Revelation, the Christ of St. Paul. Teilhard's universe is in the process of Christification, And this reality becomes conscious in man, who in turn is called upon to take an active part in the evolution of man and the universe. So, according to de Chardin, both science and religion are but two aspects of one truth: the discovery that the God of creation, whose spirit shapes it, is the same God as the God of revelation. This leads to the view that higher development awaits men and the universe than that we know now. Finally, when Omega is reached, there will occur the transformation of all things in Christ, in which the universe and man will not be destroyed, but be remade in the light of the divine image of it. No scientist, philosopher, or theologian, indeed, no human being who seeks to make a sense of the complexity of the world can afford to bypass Teilhard. An acquaintance with his thought is an inspiration for all thoughtful and creative minds.